You probably think of yourself as a highly rational person, like someone who can just look at new facts, weigh the evidence, and smoothly change your mind when you're presented with better information.
Right. I mean, we all like to think we are that person.
Yeah, exactly. But what if your stubbornness, that intense friction you feel when someone challenges your deepest beliefs, isn't a personality flaw at all? What if it's actually a biological imperative?
It's a pretty profound shift in perspective when you really get into it.
It really is. And our sources today focus on this concept called cognitive sunk costs. They argue that personal growth feels like you're fighting for your life because, well, to your brain, you actually are.
Yeah, when you dive into these notes, you realize that your resistance to change isn't, it's not a lack of character. It's this incredibly aggressive evolutionary survival mechanism playing out in real time.
And the mission for this deep dive is to map out that brutal biological machinery that actively keeps you trapped in the past. We're skipping the usual psychological platitudes today.
Right, no fluffy talk about finding your growth mindset.
Exactly. Instead, we're looking purely at grounded neurobiology. We are looking at the wetware in your head. Because to understand why we stay stuck in bad jobs, bad relationships, or, bad ideas, we first have to look at how the brain actually processes the concept of changing your mind.
Well, the foundational premise we have to start with is how the brain categorizes a threat. The research shows that an identity shift, or even just a fundamental change of opinion, is treated by the brain as a literal physical threat to your survival.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this right there. Are you saying my brain literally cannot tell the difference between a physical predator jumping out of the bushes and, I don't know, someone leaving a comment that disagrees with my political views?
I know it sounds wild, but yes.
Because structurally, those seem entirely different. I mean, one is going to eat me and the other is just, annoying.
What's fascinating here is that, functionally, the biological alarm bells are remarkably similar. And it all basically boils down to this concept called metabolic cost.
Metabolic cost, okay.
Right. Think of your brain as a massively energy-hungry engine. I mean, it only makes up about 2% of your body weight, but it burns nearly 20% of your daily caloric intake.
Wow, 20%.
Yeah. So it is constantly running on a very tight energy budget.
So it's basically an energy hag just trying to keep the power bill down.
Exactly that. And neuroplasticity, which is the actual physical process of changing your mind, is just incredibly expensive.
Expensive in terms of calories.
Yes, in calories and glucose. When you encounter information that forces you to update your identity, the brain has to physically dismantle old neural pathways and construct new ones. Synapses have to be rewired.
And that takes energy.
A massive surge of glucose and oxygen. The brain evaluates that required energy expenditure as a literal existential crisis. It treats the metabolic cost of ego death with the same severity as actual physical death. Because, evolutionarily speaking, running out of energy used to mean dying.
I mean, I get that the brain uses energy, but surely thinking about a new, correct idea doesn't burn that much more fuel than just thinking about an old, wrong one.
Well, it actually does.
Really?
Yeah. Firing an old, deeply grooved neural pathway is like driving down a paved highway. It requires almost zero extra effort. But forging a new belief is, it's like hacking your way through a dense jungle with a machete.
Oh, that makes sense.
So the brain calculates that preserving a failing, outdated identity is far cheaper metabolically than building a brand new one from scratch. And it relies on a specific network of regions to enforce this, primarily the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, along with the amygdala and the insula.
Okay, before we go further, we need to define those. The amygdala is the fear center, right?
Yes, the amygdala is your brain threat response center, and then the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, is essentially your brain's error detector. It constantly monitors your environment for conflicts or anomalies.
And what about the insula?
The insula is the region that processes internal bodily sensations. You know when you get that sudden dropping pit in your stomach during an argument?
Yeah, I hate that feeling.
Well, that is your insula lighting up.
So let's put this into a real-world scenario to see how this network actually operates. Let's say you've been running a specific project at work for 5 years. It's your baby.
Okay, I can picture that.
Then a junior colleague walks in, runs a presentation, and proves with hard data that your entire approach has been fundamentally flawed from day one. Walk me through the milliseconds after that happens.
All right, so first, the anomaly hits your ears, and your ACC immediately flags the discrepancy. It detects a massive conflict between your current professional identity the competent project leader, and this incoming data.
It basically spots the error on the spreadsheet of your life.
Yes, perfectly said. And within milliseconds, the ACC signals the amygdala and a system called the salience network.
The salience network.
Yeah, it acts like the brain's radar system. It decides what is important enough to demand your attention. Together, they sound a massive systemic alarm.
So the alarm goes off. What happens then?
Your body physically reacts, your insula kicks in, causing your heart rate to spike, your palms sweat, your face flushes.
I know that exact feeling. It's that sudden, hot, defensive spike in your chest before you even consciously realize you're angry.
Exactly. That is the physical manifestation of the threat response. And while that alarm is blaring, your brain performs a rapid metabolic cost evaluation.
Just doing the math on the calories.
Right. It weighs the massive amount of glucose needed to accept this new truth, restructure your professional identity, admit fault, versus the tiny amount of energy needed to just reject the junior colleague's data.
And because it's cheap, it chooses rejection.
Always. This is where the protective response kicks in. We call it cognitive resistance or rationalization.
Oh, right.
Your brain rapidly feeds you reasons why the new information is flawed. You immediately think, well, this kid doesn't understand our market, or these metrics are skewed.
So it manufactures the excuses for you, completely bypassing objective logic.
Entirely bypassing that.
It's like a biological security system. Like the ACC is the tripwire on the window detecting the break-in. The amygdala is the incredibly loud alarm bell going off in the building. And rationalization isn't actually deep thought. Rationalization is just the security guard tackling the intruder. Except in this case, the intruder is just a new, potentially helpful idea.
I really love that framing. And to take that security guard analogy a step further, imagine the guard isn't even looking at the intruder's ID to see if they belong there.
He just wants them out.
Yeah, he's just looking at how much paperwork neutralizing them will save. Rationalization feels like deep logical thinking to the person doing it, but under the hood is just the brain neutralizing a threat to its energy budget.
And the craziest part is the behavioral outcome, because once you successfully rationalize the threat away, you feel this rush of relief. You feel vindicated.
And that relief is the final trap. It is dopamine reinforcing the loop. Your brain rewards you for saving energy, which makes you even more likely to aggressively defend your outdated methods the next time someone brings them up.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. If this biological system inherently makes us cling to lies, and if it actively prevents us from growing or adapting to new information, why on earth did human beings evolve this way in the first place?
That's a great question.
Because it seems like a massive, fatal design flaw to have a brain that prefers being wrong and comfortable over being right.
Well, it looks like a flaw when you sit in a modern office, but we have to look at the evolutionary logic. You have to remember the environment in which this brain evolved, the Pleistocene era.
So we're talking about the Ice Age, hunter-gatherer times.
Correct. An era stretching back millions of years where early humans were constantly on the brink of starvation. In a harsh ancestral environment where calories are incredibly scarce and immediate physical threats are everywhere, you absolutely do not have the luxury of constantly questioning your reality or having an identity crisis.
Because sitting under a tree, pondering if your hunting strategy is philosophically sound burns calories, you need to run away from a tiger.
Precisely. The brain made a crucial, brutal evolutionary calculation. Stability is vastly more important than accuracy.
Stability over accuracy.
Right. If your internal model of the world, your identity, your beliefs, your habits, is just good enough to keep you alive until tomorrow morning, the brain locks it in. It is far more efficient to confidently operate on a slightly inaccurate worldview than to burn precious glucose, constantly agonizing over the objective truth.
So it's a feature, not a bug. It was a necessary trade-off between survival efficiency and truth.
It was brilliant hardware for the Pleistocene, but here is the catch, and this is what the sources identify as the modern failure mode.
Okay, what's that?
We no longer live in an environment where our primary problem is starving to death because we thought too hard about our identity. But the biological hardware hasn't updated.
So the system is running software designed for a world that literally doesn't exist anymore.
And the fallout of that is massive. In the modern world, this survival mechanism misfires constantly. Our self-models become incredibly rigid and outdated, and the long-term cost of staying in these incorrect self-models destroys careers, relationships, and societies.
Yeah, how does an ancient amygdala threat response explain our everyday modern failures? Like, I want to ground this in the real world.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, The source material maps this biology to 3 very concrete, everyday examples to show just how much damage this ancient energy-saving tactic does.
Let's walk through those.
The first example is career stagnation. Imagine someone staying in a job for years despite clear, objective misalignment. They are miserable, the industry is shifting, and they logically know they should pivot. But they stay.
You see this all the time. I mean, people complain every single day about their boss, their commute, the lack of growth. So why do they freeze when it's time to actually update their resume?
Because the brain runs a metabolic simulation of a career shift. It calculates the energy required to learn entirely new skills, build a new network, and endure the cognitive load of being a beginner again.
Oh, and nobody likes being a beginner.
The brain especially hates the lack of automation in the beginner phase. It requires immense prefrontal cortex activity. So the ACC tricks, the amygdala fires, and the rationalization security guard steps in. It says, well, the job market is too volatile right now, or I'm already 10 years into this path, I can't throw that away.
Wow. So they aren't staying because it's actually a safer bet long term. They are staying because the brain is terrified of the immediate calorie burn required to redefine their professional identity.
Exactly. And the second scenario might be even more common, which is staying in a failing relationship. 2 people who has clearly grown apart, where the partnership is a daily source of stress and misery.
And yet they drag it out for years, sometimes decades. But wait, if the brain is trying to avoid stress to save energy, wouldn't getting out of a toxic relationship be the energy-saving move?
You would think so, right? But you have to consider how deeply intertwined a partner is in your neural mapping. Your brain has mapped their habits, their reactions, the physical layout of your shared life. It is highly predictable.
So predictable equals cheap.
Yes. Untangling that life, moving out, and forging a brand new identity as a single person requires millions of new micro-predictions every single day. The brain perceives that as an existential energy drain. It is metabolically cheaper to just endure the familiar misery than to fund the reconstruction of your daily reality.
Wow. The familiar failure is cheaper than the uncertain success.
Always. Which leads to the third example, maintaining outdated beliefs despite undeniable contradictory evidence. This is the absolute core of cognitive sunk costs.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Let's say you have publicly defended a specific political stance, or a financial investment, or a worldview for years.
Like doubling down on a stock that is clearly tanking, or a leader who is clearly failing.
Yes. When new, undeniable evidence is presented that proves you wrong, admitting fault requires a devastating amount of metabolic energy to dismantle your public and private sense of self. It requires you to process the social fallout and rebuild your worldview.
So what does the brain do?
So your brain simply refuses to process the new evidence. It actively degrades your cognitive ability to read the facts in front of you.
But here's the thing I keep coming back to. When you are in the middle of it, when you are the one sitting at that miserable desk or fighting the same exhausted fight in that bad relationship or furiously arguing your outdated belief in a comment section, it doesn't feel like a cold metabolic calculation.
No, it doesn't.
It feels incredibly deep. It feels intensely emotional. People say, but I have to defend this. This is who I am. This is my truth.
And that brings us to the most fascinating psychological illusion at the heart of all this. The brain is remarkably good at confusing familiarity with truth. What feels to the listener like their true, authentic identity is often just something neuroscientists call predictive efficiency.
Predictive efficiency. Break that down for me. What does that mean in the context of my identity?
Your brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. Its primary job is to guess what is going to happen next so it can prepare the body and not waste energy figuring things out on the fly.
Okay, tracking with you.
So, a familiar identity, even a failing, miserable one, is highly predictable. The brain knows all the rules of your miserable job. It knows the exact script of the arguments in your bad relationship. It knows how to navigate that misery with extreme efficiency.
Because it's fully automated, it requires zero novel computation.
Yes. So when you feel that fierce emotional defense rising up in your chest, that feeling of, this is who I am, you aren't actually defending a deep philosophical truth about your soul. You are defending the neural pathways that are easiest for your brain to predict.
So what does this all mean? If I'm hearing this right, you're saying that when I feel like I'm fiercely defending my core identity, my absolute truth as a person, I might just be defending the path of least resistance. I'm just protecting a highly efficient neural prediction.
That is exactly what the neurobiology suggests. And this raises an incredibly important question, which is the ultimate reframe of this entire deep dive. We have to completely strip away the moral framework we usually place around human stubbornness and resistance to change.
Right, because normally society is pretty harsh about this. We say someone who won't leave a bad situation or change a bad opinion is weak or lazy or stubborn.
The self-help industry thrives on this. They tell you that you just need more motivation, or you need to find your grit, or you lack willpower.
Right, just try harder.
But the biology tells a completely different, much more forgiving story. Clinging to a failing identity is not a sign of moral weakness. It is not a character flaw. It is simply system behavior. It is your biological hardware doing exactly what it was designed to do over millions of years, which is protect your energy reserves at all costs.
So if it's not about willpower, and it's not about watching another motivational video to hype yourself up, how do we actually break the loop? If our biology is rigged to keep us stuck, what is the way out?
It requires a literal shift in perception. Awareness is the primary intervention here. Overcoming this biological resistance isn't about fighting your emotions. It's about recognizing the internal friction for what it actually is.
How do you do that in the moment?
When you feel that massive hot resistance to changing your mind or changing your life, you have to be able to step back and observe the machinery.
You have to catch the security guard in the act.
Yes. You have to say, that tightness in my chest is just my insula. That defensive anger is my amygdala trying to save calories. My brain is treating this new information like a physical threat, but I am not actually in danger.
You have to demystify the emotion. You have to strip the poetry out of it and look at the plumbing.
Once you remove the heavy, dramatic narrative of ego death and recognize it as a mundane biological preservation response, it loses a massive amount of its power over you. You realize you aren't actually dying. Your brain is just being cheap with its glucose.
That is incredibly liberating. It really takes all the shame out of feeling stuck.
It shifts the burden from your character to your biology. You can't change your evolutionary hardware. The ACC and the amygdala are always going to fire. But understanding how they operate, understanding that they prioritize cheap energy over objective truth, is the only way to consciously override the system.
We have covered a lot of ground today, and honestly, this framework completely changes the way I view every argument I've ever had, both with other people and with myself. To wrap up today's deep dive, I want to bring this all together for you. Your refusal to evolve, your tendency to cling to a bad situation or fiercely defend a proven wrong opinion isn't a personality flaw. It is a metabolic preservation response.
That intense emotional friction you feel when you try to adopt new information or change your life isn't a sign that you are making a mistake. It is quite literally your brain fighting an existential crisis to balance its energy budget.
That ancient biological security system will constantly try to convince you that the familiar failure is safer than the unknown success. So the next time you find yourself aggressively rationalizing a bad habit, trying to justify staying in a stagnant career, or fiercely defending an outdated belief in the face of new facts, take a second. Stop and recognize that your anterior cingulate cortex is just trying to save a few calories.
Yeah, just trying to balance the books.
Exactly. You aren't being wonderfully stubborn or defending your authentic truth. Your biology is just trying to protect a familiar lie because it's cheaper.
It completely changes how you interact with your own thoughts.
It really does.
Yeah.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day, building on the logic of everything we've unpacked here. If your brain inherently prioritizes metabolic efficiency over the actual objective truth, it makes you wonder, how many of your most deeply held fundamental beliefs about yourself are actually true, and how many are simply the cheapest energetic option your brain had available at the time?